War is defined as an actual, intentional, and widespread armed conflict between political communities. With war comes destruction, instability, and wounded. In October 1863, delegates from 16 countries along with military medical personnel agreed on the terms of a wartime humanitarian agreement, resulting in a treaty signed by 12 nations known as the First Geneva Convention.
Care of the injured soldier is expected during any war, and one can argue the official establishment of medics in World War II became a turning point in history. However, few are only trained and ready to do an entirely different mission: save lives. These were the battlefield medics. Medics in World War II were the front line of battlefield medicine. Their job was not only to conduct extensive treatment of the wounded, but to also stabilize them and prepare them for evacuation to field hospitals or medical centers to the rear. They were trained to stop bleeding, apply dressings, clean wounds, and administer morphine as a sedative. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, medics went into battle on the beaches of Normandy and fields nearby, along with their battalions, usually without a weapon. The large red cross on their helmets and armbands were supposed to protect them from harm.
While traditionally a soldier is tasked to kill, the combat medic is trained to do the exact opposite, meaning to heal, to help. When the Allied forces landed in the beaches of Normandy in 1944, the medics among them saved hundreds of lives, risking their own in the thick of battle, their motto being healing wounds and never inflicting them. Among these heroes, there were two American medics, Robert E. Wright and Kenneth J. Moore, of the U.S. Army's 101st Airborne Division. The paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division were among the first American troops to land in Normandy during the D-Day invasion. Alongside the 82nd Airborne Division, they parachuted behind enemy lines drawn on June 6, 1944.
Going to school at Ohio State and was learning to be a medic.
I volunteered for the paratroops, and they sent me to Georgia, and the major that was in charge of the medical detachment selected me to be a
Kenneth
medic.
Moore was born in Los Angeles in 1924, while Robert Wright was born in Ohio. Both privates, Moore and Wright, were assigned to the 501st Infantry Regiment, one of three which eventually made the 101st Airborne Division. Both gentlemen met at a Camp Toccoa in Georgia late 1942, where they completed their basic training. Moore and Wright arrived at Lawson General Hospital in Atlanta in 1943 for more training, Moore for a few weeks and Wright for several months. As in January of 1944, both Moore and Wright left the United States for England aboard the USS George Goethals.
Once in England, the paratroopers underwent months of training, preparing for what was coming. Invasion of Western Europe was imminent, and paratroopers prepared what they were trained for. In the winter of 1944, Germans started moving troops across France, invading villages, homes, and preparing for a possible coastal invasion. Among those villages, there is an Angloville plain with few houses, about 90 inhabitants, and the church of l'Église Saint-Côme-et-Saint-Damien, just a few miles away from the famous Normandy beaches. Moore and Wright knew something big was about to happen. The night of June 5th, 1944, the 51st Regiment was told that they would be landing in Normandy, as Moore was flying on a C-47 named the Round Trip towards drop-off point. He saw thousands of ships heading for France. There was hope after all, and he knew they were about to change the world and turn the course of history.
One of those times in history where the world changed. I mean, it really changed, and changed for the better in about a 24-hour period.
Paratroopers landed at Zone D, and Germans were waiting for them with all their artillery. Wright was the first medic to land in Normandy about 600 yards from Angellville. Spotting the tip of the church, he quietly headed to the village.
And as he was coming down, he saw the steeple to the church. And he knew that would be a good place for wounded to know where to go to, because it's a landmark. And so that's where he walked there to get to the church. And Kenneth Moore was actually dropped on the other side of the church, and he ended up going there too, so he must have realized.
Moore was the last one to jump from his plane, landing in the water 3 feet deep because the Germans had flooded the fields. Hearing snipers' bullets passing by as he walked, he saw the tip of the church of Angellville. Bringing along a few injured soldiers with him, Moore found a celestial vision for sore eyes upon arriving to the church, as Wright had already put the Red Cross sign up at the
Best thing I could
entrance.
think of, and it was the safest.
Neither of our doctors showed up, so Bob Wright and I were the only two medics that assembled in this area around the church at Angerville.
It was early in the morning, and we set up at this.
While the fighting raged around him, they worked tirelessly, treating everyone the same, no matter if they were American, British, German, or locals.
That's when they all could see the first wounded gathering. So that's when they thought, let's use this church as our aid station. So Bob Wright, he had 6 weeks of training, and Ken Moore, he had just 3 weeks of training. And because of that, that's when Bob Wright stayed in the church with all the wounded, and Ken Moore, he was collecting the wounded all over the countryside. He found himself a pushcart on a nearby farm, and on the first night, when they took over here, the Germans, they started counterattacking. There were the paratroopers who were coming from Carentan, which is over there. Now,
During this time, all of them were at peril as several mortars did hit the building. The worst of these incidents occurred when a mortar shell fell through the roof of the church, landing in the middle of the aisle, causing Wright a large scalp wound, which earned him a Purple Heart Medal. By the end of June 6th, about 80 men, among them both Americans and Germans, were under the care of Wright and Moore within the church. That evening, an American officer entered the church and announced the German forces had broken through the American defenses. As the Americans were losing control of the village, Wright and Moore were given the option to retreat, but both decided to stay and continue to care
but
for the
still
wounded.
very much visible 7 decades after the fight passed through Angerville are the bloodstains of both American and German soldiers. They remain an enduring representation of compassion.
With the Red Cross armband as their only armor, they bravely kept carrying wounded to their sanctuary, staying firm on their rule of leaving any armor outside of the building to ensure safety of all inside the church. Wright even later recalled several instances where German soldiers assisted in carrying the wounded on stretchers into the church. However, by the afternoon of June 7th, American troops moved back into the village after another day of fierce fight.
And at one time, they came back, and I know this German soldier, he actually went and met my dad, that he made him put all the weapons on the outside of the church. They weren't allowed to put the weapons inside, bring the weapons.
Moore and Wright maintained the aid station until the hamlet of Angoville-au-Plain was liberated, leaving the church on June 8, 1944. Both received a Silver Star Medal for their actions.
what happened here was really special. The Germans and the American medics working together.
It's an important moment for people to recognize that in war there can be compassion. They were there to save lives, and that included German lives. And I think that's why they were allowed to continue their work in the church, even though the Germans had surrounded the church, because the Germans recognized they were there.
As both soldiers worked relentlessly, they slowly brought a tide that shifted the war's course, changing the battlefield by saving soldiers' lives on either side. From a time when medical professionals did not belong on the battlefield and injuries subdued soldiers, these two heroic patriots brought a change that sparked a new wave into the medical world, giving them a safe haven for all soldiers while saving thousands of lives and bringing more attention to medical safety.
The smaller amount of healthcare on the battlefield and the increase of artillery and dangerous weapons came with the need for medical training, bringing trained medics to the battlefield. Through the use of penicillin and streptomycin being administered for the first time in combat, a new wave of medical practices surged through the battlefield, replacing unhygienic practices while saving thousands of lives. Through substitutions and new treatments emerging due to the need for medics on the battlefield, the world of medicine and war changed altogether, bringing people through the conventions and training for the protection of the humanity.
As we look back and reflect on D-Day, the heroic actions of such brave men can and should be used as inspiration to half as courageous as these beloved medics. They were determined, and compassion was their only ammunition, one which was powerful. D-Day certainly was a turning point in the world's history, but the heroic choices of these medics prioritized compassion above all, making it a turning point in world's humanity. Fortunately, throughout history and to this day, compassion prevails.